The invitation had said arrival by midday. Mara arrived at 2:30, with a rolled-up map under one arm, a bag that kept slipping off her shoulder, and absolutely no idea that she had just walked into the most important ceremony on the continent. She had been lost. That was the plain truth of it, and she saw no reason to dress it up. She had a map of the northern roads, which was excellent and accurate in every detail, except for the one small matter of the new bridge that had been built 2 years ago, and therefore did not appear on the map she was holding. She had spent 40 minutes walking toward a river crossing that no longer existed in the way the map promised it would, and then another 20 minutes finding the actual bridge 300 yards downstream, and then another full hour making up for lost time through a forest that smelled strange and made her neck prickle for reasons she could not explain. She had chalked it up to the trees. Some forest smelled strange. She was a cartographer's assistant, not a botanist. By the time the trees gave way and the valley opened up below her, she was warm. Her boots were damp at the toes, and she was ready to sit down. What she saw in the valley below did not immediately register as a problem. She saw a gathering. She saw a lot of people, which was expected. She had been sent here by her employer, Aldous Brennan, to collect survey notes from the regional contact, and to verify 3 boundary markers that were in dispute. She was not there for the ceremony. She was there for the maps. Aldous had mentioned something about a ceremony. He had waved his hand in the way he always did when he considered something tangential. There is some sort of festival, he had said. A mating thing. The packs do it every 5 years. Try not to get in the way. Mara had nodded and packed her bag and told herself she would be in and out before anything complicated happened. She was already in the middle of something complicated. She just had not registered it yet. She came down the hillside path and through the carved stone gate that marked the entrance to the gathering grounds, and a man in dark clothing looked at her visitor's pass and waved her through without a word. That should have told her something. He did not smile. He did not ask her name. He simply looked at the pass, looked at her, and stepped aside with the expression of a man watching something happen that he had no authority to stop. Mara noticed none of this. She was looking for a place to put her bag down. The gathering grounds were enormous. She had read about them in the regional survey notes, but reading about something and standing inside it were 2 different things entirely. The grounds were a wide-open circle of flat, pale stone, surrounded on all sides by tiered standing areas where hundreds of people were already gathered. Thousands, maybe. She had not expected thousands. She recalculated. The notes had said, the 5 packs gathered here every 5 years. She had read that as a modest regional assembly. She had been wrong. This was not modest. This was the sort of gathering that felt like weather. Everyone was dressed in ceremonial clothing. Deep colors, heavy fabric, formal cuts. Mara looked down at herself. She was wearing her work clothes, which were practical and clean, but were not ceremonial by any stretch. Her coat was good brown wool. Her boots were good but damp. She had a scarf around her neck because the morning had been cold, and she had forgotten to take it off when the afternoon warmed up. She was, without question, the least formally dressed person she could see in any direction. That was fine. She was not there for the ceremony. She was there for the boundary markers. She scanned the ground for her contact, a man named Crispin Dale who handled land records for the region. She had a letter with his description. Average height, gray at the temples, usually wearing a green vest. She did not see a green vest anywhere in the crowd. What she did see, at the very head of the ceremonial circle, set on a raised platform of pale stone, was a chair. Not a chair, exactly. She revised the word as soon as it formed. It was a throne. It was an enormous, ancient-looking seat carved from black stone, with a flat cushioned surface that someone had lined with dark red fabric. It sat at the highest point of the raised dais, slightly apart from the 2 rows of formal seating arranged on either side of it. Those seats were filled. Every single one of them. Every dignitary, elder, and official had already taken their place in the tiered rows along the circle's edge. The throne was empty. Mara's feet hurt. She looked at the throne. She looked at the crowd. She looked at her bag, which had slipped off her shoulder again. She needed to find Crispin Dale, but Crispin Dale was not visible, and the ceremony had not yet begun, and the stone underfoot was very flat and very hard, and that throne had a cushion. She told herself she would sit for just a moment. She told herself no one would notice. She climbed the 3 wide steps to the dais and sat down in the Alpha King's throne. The cushion was exactly as good as it had looked from below. She set her bag on her knees, pulled out her map, and began looking for the boundary marker notes she had tucked into the left fold. The stone around her was cool and solid. The noise of the crowd was a low, even murmur. Someone nearby smelled like fresh bread, which reminded her that she had not eaten since early morning, and she reached into the outer pocket of her bag, where she kept travel food, and found half a bread roll wrapped in cloth. She ate the bread roll. She studied her map. She did not notice that the murmur of the crowd had changed. It happened in layers, the way temperature changes in water, when you walk into the shallows of a cold river. First, the people closest to the dais went quiet. Then the quiet moved outward in a slow wave, rippling through the tiered rows and up the sides of the standing areas, until, by the time it reached the far edge of the gathering grounds, it was the kind of silence that has weight. 2,000 wolves had gone still. Not politely still. Not the quiet of an audience waiting for a performance to begin. This was the held silence of a species that understood, in the deep instinctive part of itself, that something significant was happening. The kind of silence that preceded announcements of war, or the naming of heirs, or the end of things. Mara turned a fold in the map and found her boundary notes. At the far entrance to the gathering grounds, Alpha King Calum Ashford paused. He was 31 years old and had held the throne of the 5 Packs for 9 of those years, since his father's death at the border skirmish outside the Greystone Pass. He was built the way men built to lead wolves were built, tall and broad-shouldered and very difficult to overlook, with dark hair and the kind of stillness in his face that came not from coldness, but from long habit of not letting anything show. He wore the ceremonial black of the Alpha King, with the silver clasp at his collar that bore the mark of his bloodline, and he walked the way he always walked into the gathering grounds, which was with the particular measured calm of someone who had done this before and expected everything to be exactly as it always was. He expected the tiered rows to be full. He expected the circle to be prepared. He expected his throne to be empty. It was not empty. He stopped. His first elder, a lean older man named Gareth Cole, who walked 2 steps behind him by tradition, stopped as well. Gareth looked at the throne. He looked at the woman sitting in it, eating what appeared to be a bread roll and reading a map. He said nothing. There was nothing in his considerable experience that had prepared him with appropriate words for this specific situation. Calum stood at the entrance to the gathering grounds and looked at the woman in his throne. His chest felt like something had detonated inside it. That was the only way he could have described it, if anyone had asked him in that moment, which no one did, because no one around him was speaking. The bond, his fated mate bond, the thing that every wolf carried somewhere deep in the structure of who they were, dormant until the right person stood close enough to wake it. His bond went off like a signal fire. It was not subtle. It was not gradual. It was the way a bell sounds when it is struck directly, immediate, resonant, leaving no room in the air for anything else. He stood there with 2,000 wolves, watching him in complete silence, and he stared at a woman in a brown wool coat, who was reading a map and finishing a bread roll, and had absolutely no idea he existed. She had brown hair pinned up in the practical way of someone who did not spend time thinking about their hair. She had ink on her right hand. She had a scarf around her neck that did not match her coat. She looked like someone who had walked a long way and was glad to have found somewhere to sit. She looked entirely unbothered by the silence, which told him she had not yet registered it. As if she heard the thought, she looked up. Their eyes met across the width of the gathering grounds. Mara's first thought was that he was very large. Her second thought was that everyone had gone quiet. Her third thought, arriving slightly behind the first two, was that the man standing at the entrance was looking at her in a way that made her feel she had done something specific and significant, and not something good. She looked to her left. The 2 rows of official seats were staring at her. She looked to her right. More staring. She looked behind her. The tiered rows rose in silence. 2,000 faces pointed at the dais, with the particular expression of people, watching a natural disaster unfold, with the understanding that they are not close enough to be harmed by it personally. Mara looked down at the throne she was sitting in. She looked at the map in her hands. She looked at the bread roll, which she had nearly finished. A cold feeling started at the back of her neck and moved downward. She looked at the man at the entrance again. He had not moved. He was still watching her with that expression, the one she could not fully read but which contained, She was increasingly certain. A great deal of information about this throne, and what it meant, and who it belonged to. She was sitting in something she was not supposed to be sitting in. That much was becoming very clear. She straightened slightly, with the dignity of someone who has been caught doing something they cannot undo, and has decided the only reasonable response is to act as though the situation is under control. She folded her map. She tucked it back into her bag. She considered standing up, and then decided that standing up too quickly would look worse than standing up deliberately, and so she took a breath, set her bag on her shoulder, and rose from the throne at a normal, calm, unhurried pace. She descended the 3 steps. She moved to the side of the dais. She stood with her bag and her map and the remainder of her dignity, and she looked at the man at the entrance, and he was still looking at her. He started walking. He walked the full length of the gathering grounds in that measured, unhurried way, and the silence held around every step. He came up the 3 steps to the dais, and he stood in front of his throne, and then he looked at her again. Up close he was even larger. Up close the expression on his face was harder to read and more unsettling for being so. Behind him, in a spreading wave through the crowd, the wolves around the perimeter began to do something she had not seen before. They lowered their heads, not in a bowing way exactly, in the way of a species acknowledging something their bodies understood before their minds had caught up. The first elder behind the king cleared his throat, and then, in a voice that carried to every corner of the gathering grounds without effort, Alpha King Calum Ashford said 5 words. 5 words that Mara heard very clearly. 5 words that changed every plan she had made for the afternoon, and a significant number of plans she had made for the rest of her life. She is my fated mate. Mara stood very still. She thought about Crispin Dale, and the boundary markers, and the 3 disputed lines on the survey map, and the return road she had planned to take before nightfall. She thought about the bread roll. She thought about the throne. The first elder had gone the color of old paper. The crowd was making a sound now, a low and unified sound that moved through the 2000 like wind through tall grass, and she could not tell if it was approval or alarm, or something that had no human word for it. She looked at the man who had just announced, in front of every pack elder and dignitary on the continent, that she was his fated mate. He was looking back at her. He did not look uncertain. He did not look like a man who second-guessed himself. He looked like a man stating a fact. Mara opened her mouth, and then closed it again. She was going to need a minute. She was going to need significantly more than a minute. She was, she understood, in a great deal of trouble, and it had started, as most of the worst things in her life had started, with a decision that had seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. The throne had looked comfortable. That was all. That was the whole thing. She looked at the cushion on the ancient stone seat, still holding the faint impression where she had been sitting, and thought that it was, objectively, still a very good cushion. It did not make her feel better. Nothing in the next several hours was going to make her feel better. She knew this the way she knew maps, not because someone had told her, but because she had looked at the shape of things and understood where they led. Around her, the gathering of the 5 packs exhaled, and Mara stood at the edge of the dais, with her bag slipping off her shoulder, and her damp boots, and her ink-stained hand, and waited to find out what came next. Nobody moved. That was the first thing. The 2,000 wolves packed into the tiered rows and standing areas of the gathering grounds had turned into something close to stone, and the silence they were holding had a texture to it, something heavy and expectant that pressed against the back of Mara's neck like a hand. She was very aware of her bag. It kept sliding. She shifted it on her shoulder for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon, and the small movement seemed extraordinarily loud against the quiet, and several pairs of eyes in the nearest row tracked it, the way eyes track motion in the dark. Alpha King Calum Ashford had not moved from where he stood. He was on the dais, 3 steps above ground level, which meant he was looking down at her from a height that her brain kept flagging, as significant even as she told her brain to stop being distracted by things that did not matter. He was very still, not the stillness of someone frozen or uncertain, the stillness of someone who had decided something and was waiting for the world to catch up. He was waiting for her to catch up. She was aware of this. Behind him, the first elder. She still did not know his name. She had not planned on meeting anyone important enough to have one, had recovered some of his color, and was now wearing the expression of a man doing rapid, complex calculations in his head. To the left and right, in the formal seats along the dais, figures in ceremonial dress were doing the same. She could see the math of it moving through their faces, the shock, the calculation, the careful repositioning. Mara had spent enough time in rooms with Aldous Brennan, who negotiated land disputes for a living, to recognize when a room full of people was reorganizing their priorities. She understood, the new priority. She did not find this comfortable. "My name is Mara Finch," she said. She said it at a normal volume, and the silence carried it easily. "I am a cartographer's assistant. I came here to collect survey notes from a man named Crispin Dale." She paused. "I am not supposed to be on this dais." Calum looked at her. "I know," he said. "I sat in that seat because I was tired, and my feet hurt," she said. "I know. I did not know whose seat it was." "I know that as well." She looked at him. He looked at her. The crowd remained in their collective, breath-held suspension. "And that doesn't change anything," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She had suspected as much. She nodded once, the way she nodded when a survey turned up results she had not hoped for but had half expected. Fine. That was the shape of things. She would work with the shape of things. She was good at that. The first elder stepped forward. He had a thin face and sharp gray eyes, and the bearing of a man who had managed complicated situations for a very long time. "I am Gareth Cole, first elder of the 5 Packs." His voice was careful, the voice of a man measuring every word before it left his mouth. "You are aware, perhaps, of the significance of the fated mate bond." "I know what it is," Mara said. "I have worked in wolf territories for 6 years. Aldous, my employer, told me about it when I started." Gareth Cole studied her. "Then you understand that what the Alpha King has declared is not a decision. It is a recognition. The bond is not something that can be questioned or—" "I understand what it is," Mara said again, not rudely, flatly. "I am asking what it means for me, specifically, today, in the next several hours." Gareth Cole looked at Calum. Calum looked at Mara. "It means," Calum said, "that you do not leave these grounds today as you planned. I have a letter to write to my employer. That can be arranged. I have notes to collect from Crispin Dale." Something in Calum's expression shifted, very slightly. "Dale is here. You can speak with him." He paused. After. She filed that word. After meant there was a before, and the before involved things she had not agreed to, and she had a feeling she was about to learn what they were. She looked at the cushioned throne. She looked back at Calum. She had a powerful urge to ask if she could sit down again, but she suspected the moment for that had passed. "All right," she said. "What happens now?" What happened now was a great deal of ceremony that she had not prepared for, delivered at the measured pace of ancient tradition, surrounded by a crowd of thousands who watched her with the kind of attention that she usually only experienced when she had made a significant error on a map. Gareth Cole produced a length of deep red ribbon, and he explained what it was: a binding acknowledgement, a ceremonial recognition, and his voice was very calm and very formal, and she understood perhaps 60% of the specifics, and nodded at what she hoped were the appropriate moments. Calum stood through this explanation without expression. He did not look at her with warmth, exactly. He looked at her the way someone looks at something real and undeniable, which was not the same thing but was, in its own way, its own distinct thing. She let Gareth Cole place the ribbon across her wrist, because refusing in front of 2,000 wolves at the moment of the Alpha King's declaration seemed like the kind of decision that would make the next several hours considerably more difficult. She was not agreeing to everything. She was simply not making it worse. Right now, in this specific moment. She could sort out the details later. She was very good at the details. The ribbon was warm against her wrist. Silk, she thought. Old silk, used before, worn at its edges. Something that had been folded and kept and used for this exact ceremony for a long time. She wondered how many times it had been used. She suspected not many, if the reactions around her were anything to judge by. When the ceremonial acknowledgement was complete, the crowd moved. Not all at once, not in any disorganized way, but in the purposeful redistribution of people who knew where the reception gathering was, and were going there. The tiered rows drained. the standing areas shifted. Sound came back to the gathering grounds in the form of 1,000 conversations beginning at once, all of which she was quite certain were about her. Gareth Cole led her and Calum off the dais and into a covered walkway along the eastern side of the grounds, away from the main crowd. 3 guards fell into position without being asked, 2 ahead and 1 behind. She noticed this the way she noticed terrain features, automatically, catalogued, filed. She was being managed, gently, efficiently, with the practiced smoothness of people who knew how to move a situation through its stages without unnecessary friction. She was not going to let herself be managed so smoothly that she lost track of where she was. "I want to be clear about something," she said, as they walked. Her voice was even. Aldous had always said her best quality was her evenness. Maps did not care about your feelings, and neither did the terrain, and neither, in the end, did the facts. She had learned to match them. "I understand that this bond is real. I am not questioning that. I am not questioning what you felt, or what it means to you, or what it means to your people." Calum walked beside her. He was a head taller, and he moved with the unhurried ease of someone who had never in his life needed to hurry, because things arranged themselves around him. "But," he said. "But I am a person," she said. "Not a position, not a ceremony. I did not walk into those grounds today, expecting any of this, and I would like, at minimum, to understand what the next several days look like before I agree to anything further." He was quiet for a moment. "That is fair," he said. She had not expected him to say that. She had expected something formal, something administrative, some version of "this is how it works, and here is why your preferences are secondary to the tradition." She was prepared for that. She was not prepared for fair, said simply and without qualification. She looked at him sideways. He was looking ahead. "All right," she said. "Then tell me." He told her. He told her as they walked the covered walkway and then into the reception hall, a wide stone building that smelled of wood fire and the heavy ceremonial herbs burned at pack gatherings. He told her with the directness of someone who did not soften things as a habit, which she respected even when the things he was telling her were not easy to hear. He told her that she would be a guest in the Alpha King's residence for a minimum period, while the formal recognition was processed through the pack elders of all 5 packs. He told her that the announcement had been made in front of witnesses sufficient in number, that the bond was now a matter of public record, which meant it was a matter of pack law, which meant there were certain protocols that had to be followed, regardless of what either of them wanted personally. He told her that he knew she had not planned for this, and that arrangements would be made for her employer to be notified, and that Crispin Dale would get her the survey notes before the day was out. He did not tell her that the bond was a choice. He did not tell her it was temporary. He did not soften any of it. She listened to all of it. She asked 2 questions. Both questions were about timelines. He answered both. They reached the reception hall, and a young woman in dark clothing met them at the entrance, looking at Mara, with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was very carefully neutral. "This is Petra Dale," Gareth Cole said. "She will help you with anything you need for the evening." Petra Dale. A relation of Crispin's, perhaps. Mara filed it. "My survey notes," Mara said to her. Petra blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Crispin Dale has survey notes for me. Boundary markers, eastern region, disputed lines near the Greyford Fork." She reached into her bag and produced a letter. "This is the authorization from my employer. I'd like the notes before the end of the evening." Petra looked at Calum. Calum looked at Mara, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "See to it," he said to Petra. Petra took the letter and left. Mara set her bag down on a side table and straightened her scarf. The reception hall was filling with people now, the ceremony's aftermath distributing itself through the space in clusters, and she could feel the attention tracking her as the crowd moved in. Not hostile. Something more complex than hostile. Curious. Calculating. The attention of people measuring a variable they had not expected to encounter. She had the instinct, which she had learned to trust over 6 years of working in unfamiliar territories, that the next several hours were going to be a great deal harder than the last several hours, and the last several hours had not been simple. She was right. The first person to approach her was a woman in deep blue ceremonial dress, with the kind of composed grace that took years to become natural. She had light eyes and a careful smile, and she introduced herself as Lennox Arden, elder representative of the Northern Pack. "Welcome," Lennox Arden said. "We are all very surprised." "So am I," Mara said. "You are human." "Yes." "A cartographer." "A cartographer's assistant." Lennox Arden's smile held. "And you simply sat in the king's throne." "I did not know it was the king's throne." "Of course." The smile shifted, just enough. "How fortunate for you." There it was. Under the silk, under the ceremony, under the careful words. Something that had edges. She filed that too. Two other women had moved into position near Lennox Arden, close enough to have arrived together but far enough apart to seem coincidental. Mara looked at them. They looked at her. She had seen this arrangement before. In land disputes, in negotiation rooms, in the careful geography of people who wanted something and had organized themselves to get it. She had walked into a situation with deep roots and established stakes, and she had walked in with a rolled map and a bread roll. She thought about Aldous. He was going to say something that started with, "Well, I did mention," and she was going to have to listen to it for a very long time. Across the room, Calum was speaking with his elders, his profile toward her. He had not looked back at her since they came in. He was not ignoring her, exactly. He was managing the situation the way she suspected he managed everything, methodically, from the most important point outward. She was the most important point. She was also, in this room, the least informed. That was the problem with walking into a place you had not mapped. You did not know the elevations. You did not know where the unstable ground was. You could not read the terrain because you had not seen it before. She had her notes. She had 6 years of knowing how territories worked. She had her instincts, and her evenness, and her ability to look at complicated situations without flinching. It was not enough yet, but it was what she had, and she had always started with less. She accepted a cup of something warm from a passing server, and stood in the middle of the reception hall, and looked at the room the way she looked at a new survey, carefully, without assumptions, starting from the edges and working in. There was a great deal to understand. She would understand it. She always understood the terrain, eventually. She just needed time, and the growing certainty was that time was the one thing being measured out to her very carefully by people who had very specific reasons for doing so. Outside, through the high, narrow windows of the hall, the sun was getting low. She was not going to make it home before dark. She had known that since the moment on the dais. She drank the warm drink, which turned out to be spiced apple, and was quite good, and she looked at the room, and she started mapping. The room Petra Dale showed her to that night was larger than the whole ground floor of the house she shared with Aldous, in the border town of Fenwick Cross. There were 3 windows, each one tall enough that she would have had to stand on the sill to reach the top, and they looked out over a courtyard, lit by low fire basins, that turned the stone pale gold. The bed had a frame of dark carved wood. The walls were bare stone, smoothed and cool. There was a desk near the far window, solid oak, with a surface wide enough to roll out maps on, which she noticed immediately, because she noticed desks that way. She sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the desk, and tried to decide how she felt. She was not a person who spent a great deal of time deciding how she felt. Feelings, in her experience, made themselves known regardless of whether you sat down and organized them. They arrived when they arrived. What mattered was what you did while they were arriving. What she had done, in the hours between the reception hall and this room, was learn as much as she could. She had talked to Crispin Dale, who was a small, precise man, with gray at the temples and a green vest exactly as described, and who had given her the survey notes with hands that were slightly unsteady and eyes that kept going to the door as though something was going to come through it. She had asked him what he knew about fated mate bonds from a procedural standpoint, because he had worked with pack law for 20 years and knew more than most. He had told her more than she expected. He told her quickly, quietly, while pressing the survey notes into her hands, as though someone might stop him before he finished. The bond was irrevocable, in pack law, once declared. It could only be formally dissolved if one of the 2 parties was determined to be unsuitable through a council review, or if the declaring party renounced it publicly before the gathering concluded. The gathering lasted 3 days. After that, the declaration was recorded, and once recorded, it stood. That gave her 3 days. She had fallen asleep thinking about 3 days, and woken up thinking about 3 days, and now it was morning, cold light pressing through the tall windows, and she had 3 days minus 1 night. Petra Dale knocked and came in with a tray at what Mara estimated was just past dawn, based on the angle of the light. Hot water for washing, a pot of strong tea, bread and fruit, and something that smelled like eggs. Mara was already dressed. She had not brought a change of clothes because she had not planned to stay, and the clothes she was wearing were yesterday's, and she found that this bothered her considerably less than the 3-day timeline. "What is today's schedule?" she asked. Petra set down the tray. She had dark, efficient eyes, and the manner of someone very competent who had decided, not yet, how much to invest in the person in front of her. "The morning is the formal greeting session. The pack elders present themselves to the Alpha King. You will be present for that. Will I be expected to do anything?" "Stand beside him." "That's all?" "That is significant," Petra said. Mara poured tea. "And after the greeting session?" "The midday meal is a formal gathering of all pack representatives. You will sit at the high table." "And after that?" "The afternoon council session. You would not typically attend that." "I would like to attend it." Petra looked at her. Then she looked at the desk, where Mara had laid out the survey notes from Crispin Dale, and added her own notations in the margins, with the small pen she kept in her coat pocket. She looked at the map Mara had rolled out alongside the notes. "I will ask," Petra said. "Tell him I understand land law," Mara said. "I have worked in disputed territories for 6 years. I might be useful." Petra left. Mara ate her breakfast and studied the disputed boundary markers. Because she was here, and the notes were here, and there was no reason good work should go undone, just because the rest of her situation was complicated. The formal greeting session was in the main hall of the Alpha King's residence, which was a large stone building at the center of the Gathering Grounds compound. Mara arrived with Petra, who had dressed her in a borrowed dark green dress that fit reasonably well, if she did not breathe too deeply, and which Mara recognized as a significant step up from what she had been wearing the day before. Calum was already there when she arrived. He was speaking with Gareth Cole at the far end of the hall, and he looked up when she came in, and for a second something moved in his face, quickly, before the composure settled back over it. She did not know what the something was. She filed it. He crossed the hall to her. The morning light came through the high windows, at an angle, that made everything look more serious than it might have otherwise. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She looked at the assembled hall, the pack representatives in their formal positions, the arrangement of space and authority that she was learning to read. "I asked Petra if I could attend the afternoon council session. She told me. I understand boundary disputes. I have notes from the eastern markers that are relevant to at least 2 of the open cases. I would not take up time talking. I would listen, and I would offer information if asked." He looked at her for a moment. "All right." She had expected more resistance. She nodded. "Thank you." The greeting session was formal and long. She stood where she was placed and watched the pack elders come forward in sequence, presenting themselves to Calum and acknowledging his authority. Each elder also looked at her. Some of them acknowledged her directly, a small nod, a formal word. Others did not acknowledge her at all, which was itself a statement, and she catalogued it precisely as such. She counted 5 packs, 12 elders total across all of them, and of those 12, 8 acknowledged her in some form, and 4 did not. She noted which 4 without being obvious about it. After the greeting session came the midday meal at the high table, which was the longest meal she had sat through in her life. The food was good. The company was complicated. She was positioned to Calum's right, which she understood from what she had absorbed about pack protocol was a significant placement. To his left was Gareth Cole. Beyond Gareth Cole, in descending order of rank, the rest of the table arranged itself. 3 seats down from her left was Lennox Arden. Lennox Arden watched her the way a surveyor watches a property line they plan to contest, not aggressively, methodically. With patience that had the texture of long preparation, she had the 2 women who had been with her the day before on either side, Brea Whitmore, who was younger and harder around the eyes, and Clara Voss, who was older and said almost nothing, and whose silence felt more pointed than speaking. Mara ate her meal, and spoke when spoken to, and listened to everything else, and by the end of the formal dinner, she knew the following. Lennox Arden was elder representative of the Northern Pack, which shared the longest border with the Alpha King's Central Territory. Brea Whitmore was from the Eastern Pack and had a brother on the Pack Council. Clara Voss had been at the last 3 gathering ceremonies, all 5 years apart, and had watched the Alpha King's seat for 15 years without it producing a mate declaration of any kind. She also knew that all three of them had something in common, which Crispin Dale had mentioned briefly, and which she had been turning over since. For the past several years, there had been a quiet, persistent effort among certain pack families to position daughters as potential formal mates for the Alpha King. Not through the fated bond, that was not how it worked, but through political arrangement, through proximity, through the slow accumulation of social presence. She had walked into the middle of that effort and sat down in a throne. The afternoon council session was held in a smaller stone room with a long table and a fireplace big enough to walk into. Mara sat against the wall, slightly behind and to the right of Calum's chair, with her survey notes on her knee. The first two cases were standard border maintenance, two packs disputing the placement of marker stones that had apparently moved over the winter, possibly due to flooding. She listened without speaking. The second case involved a water rights conflict near a tributary of the Grey River, and she found herself looking at a map the council passed along the table and seeing immediately that the survey line it referenced was wrong. She did not speak. She waited. The case went back and forth for 20 minutes without resolution. Gareth Cole looked increasingly frustrated. Calum's expression did not change, but she had been watching him closely enough now that she thought she could see something underneath the stillness, something that was not quite patience. "The survey line is off," she said, quietly, not intruding, just stating. Every head in the room turned. She looked at the map, and not at the faces. The survey this references was conducted 11 years ago. There was a landslide near the Grey River Fork 2 winters after that survey. I have the updated notes from Crispin Dale in my records, because this boundary falls within the eastern region I was sent to verify. She held up the notes. The tributary moved 40 yards east. Both markers on this map are positioned relative to the old course, not the current one. The dispute exists because you are all arguing about a line that refers to water that is no longer where the map says it is. The silence after that was a different kind from the silence of the day before. Less ceremonial, more the silence of a room catching up. Gareth Cole reached out a hand. She passed him the notes. He read them. He passed them to the elder to his left. Around the table they went. Calum did not look at the notes. He was looking at her. She looked back at him, neutral, even. The case was resolved in 12 minutes. Mara said nothing else for the rest of the session. On the walk back from the council room, with the light going gray and thin in the courtyard, Calum fell into step beside her. He said nothing for a while. She did not fill the silence. "You noticed the error when they passed the map," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "In how long?" She considered. "About 30 seconds. He walked beside her. "Why didn't you speak immediately?" "Because I had just sat down in a room full of people who did not invite me there," she said, and pointing out that everyone was wrong in the first 2 minutes would have made it harder to be believed later. He was quiet for a moment longer. "That is very practical," he said. "I am a very practical person," she said. They reached the door to the residential wing. She stopped. He stopped. The guards at the door were very carefully looking at the middle distance. "You said 3 days," she said, "for the gathering, after which the declaration is formally recorded." "Yes. That means you have 2 days remaining, including today, in which you could renounce it." He looked at her steadily. "I know what it means." "I am not telling you to do it," she said. "I am asking whether you are going to." He said nothing for a moment, and she realized she had done something she almost never did, which was ask a question she was not certain she wanted the answer to. "No," he said. She nodded. She had expected that. She had been prepared for that. She was fine with that, in the way that she was fine with survey results she had hoped would go differently. You worked with what was real. She was going to work with what was real. But she went to bed that night with the quiet, certain knowledge that there were 3 women in this compound who had been working toward something for a very long time, and one of them had a silence that was sharper than speaking, and the 2 days remaining were going to be very, very carefully watched. She lay in the bed with the carved dark frame and looked at the ceiling and thought about boundary lines and how, in her experience, the ones on paper were never quite the same as the ones on the ground. She thought about what she had said to Calum, about not speaking up too soon, about being believed later. She thought about how she had said it so easily, as though it were just technique. It was technique. She had spent a long time making it technique. She thought about the 4 elders who had not acknowledged her in the greeting session. She thought about the survey notes and what she could do with the 3 remaining disputed cases Crispin had flagged. She thought about Lennox Arden's eyes. Then she stopped thinking and went to sleep, because the terrain did not change based on how much time you spent worrying about it overnight, and morning always came with new information, and she needed to be rested enough to use it. Tomorrow was the 2nd day. She intended to use it. She found the note under her door before Petra arrived with the breakfast tray. It was written on heavy cream paper in a script so controlled and clean it looked like an engraving. The words were very polite. They invited her to a private morning gathering in the residence garden, hosted by Lennox Arden, Brea Whitmore, and Clara Voss, for the purposes of welcoming her properly. It was signed with all 3 names in the same controlled hand, which meant one of them had written it for all 3, and she found herself staring at that detail for a moment, thinking about what it meant about their level of coordination. She set the note on the desk beside her survey papers. She thought about not going. She thought about the things that not going would communicate to 3 people who were already watching her carefully. She thought about the things that going would communicate. Then she thought about maps, and about how the only way to know what was on the other side of a ridge was to go over it. She went. The residence garden was in the sheltered interior courtyard, surrounded by the stone walls of the building on all 4 sides. It was not large, but it was arranged well, with low plantings and 2 stone benches, and a small table, where tea had been laid out with a care that told her this invitation had been planned longer than one evening. The fire basin in the corner had already been lit. Everything was prepared, and waiting, and utterly calm. Lennox Arden was standing when Mara came through the courtyard door. Brea Whitmore was seated. Clara Voss was at the far bench with a cup already in her hand, looking at a point somewhere past Mara's left shoulder. "Miss Finch." Lennox Arden smiled, and the smile was something well-practiced and well-maintained. "I am so glad you came." "Thank you for the invitation," Mara said. She sat down at the empty chair, which had been placed, she noted, with its back to the building's main entrance. She could not see the door from where she was sitting. That might have been coincidence. She did not think it was. Tea was poured. Small cakes were offered. The morning was bright and cold, and the stone walls caught the light pleasantly. For a few minutes, the conversation was light. Where was she from? What kind of work was cartography exactly? Had she been to the Northern Territories before? She answered easily. She had nothing to hide in any of these answers, and so she gave them freely, and watched the 3 women receive the information, and file it, and adjust. Then the conversation changed. It changed the way weather changes, gradual enough that there was no clear moment where you could point and say, "There, that is where it shifted." "It must be very overwhelming," Lennox Arden said. Her voice was full of a warmth that had edges underneath it, like warm water over stone. "All of this. We want you to know that we understand. We bear you no ill will." "I appreciate that," Mara said. "You seem very sensible," Brea Whitmore said. She had a direct, bright quality, like someone who had decided that looking straight forward was the most effective form of approach. "A practical person. Anyone can see that." "People keep telling me that," Mara said pleasantly. Clara Voss said nothing. She sipped her tea. "The thing is," Lennox Arden said, "and I do want to say this gently, because truly, we mean it kindly." She set down her cup. "The fated mate bond is a wolf thing. It is a very deep, very sacred part of our world. But it is also, and I say this with the greatest respect for the Alpha King, for whom we all care very much, it is also a thing that exists in the body before it exists in the mind. Do you understand what I mean?" "You are suggesting," Mara said, "that the bond might be real and still not be the right thing. For the Pax, or for me." Lennox Arden looked slightly thrown that she had arrived there so directly. "You understand very quickly." "I am paid to understand terrain," Mara said. "This is terrain." A pause. Clara Voss set down her cup. "You are human," Brea said. "Not unkindly. Precisely. Yes. The Alpha King's mate carries certain responsibilities. She stands with him in all council matters. She is recognized by all 5 packs as the second authority in the territory. She participates in the formal ceremonies, the seasonal gatherings, the pack rituals. Brea's voice stayed very even. These are not small things. They require specific knowledge, specific background, a lifetime of understanding how the packs work. I agree, Mara said. All three of them looked at her. I don't know enough yet, she said. I know that. I have been here for less than 2 days, and I am aware that I am behind on a significant amount of information. She looked at her tea. I am not arguing with any of that. Lennox Arden leaned forward very slightly. Then you understand our concern. I understand what you are saying, Mara said. I am not certain your concern is entirely about the packs. She looked up. But I take the point about the responsibilities. And I am not going anywhere until I understand them better. The silence that followed was a different texture from any of the silences she had experienced in this compound so far. Less formal. More real. She had said something that landed differently than they had planned for. Clara Voss spoke for the first time. Her voice was low and precise, the voice of someone who did not spend words lightly. You are not as easy to manage as you look. I have been told that also, Mara said. Clara Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then something moved in her eyes. Not warmth, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. Possibly. The recognition of one person who does not waste words, meeting another. Lennox Arden recovered. We only want what is best, she said, and the warmth was back in her voice, smooth and seamless. For everyone, including you. Of course, Mara said. They drank their tea. The conversation returned to lighter things. Brea told a story about the gathering 5 years ago that was funny and well told. Lennox Arden asked more questions about cartography, and this time her interest seemed slightly more real. Clara Voss said 2 more things, both of them short and precise. Mara left the garden with the same information she had entered with, but more of it confirmed. Lennox Arden was the one who organized things, who managed the surface of situations. Brea Whitmore was the one who made the direct arguments, the one who appeared to be saying out loud what the others left unspoken. Clara Voss was the one who watched, and who had been watching for the longest time, and who, Mara suspected, was the most dangerous of the 3, not because of what she did, but because of what she knew. She went back to her room, and sat at the desk with the survey notes, and thought about terrain. She thought about how, when you were mapping difficult ground, the ridges and the gullies were not your enemy, they were just information. The enemy was the assumption that the ground was easier than it was, the decision to mark it from a distance without checking it yourself. She was checking. She picked up her pen and went back to the disputed boundary cases. Calum came to find her at noon, which she had not expected. He knocked, which she also had not expected. She said, "Come in," and he came in and looked at the desk covered in maps and notes, and paused in the doorway for a second, in a way that told her the desk in that particular state was not something he had anticipated. Petra said you spent the morning in the garden with Lennox Arden, he said. I did. And? She considered what to tell him. She thought about the 3 women, and the careful tea, and the questions that were actually arguments wearing the clothes of concern. She thought about telling him all of it, and about what that would do, and about whether it was her place to do it. They are organized, she said. They care about the packs. Some of what they said was politically motivated, and some of it was genuine, and I believe they can hold both of those things at the same time. She paused. They are not wrong, that I do not know enough yet. He looked at her. What did you say to them? I agreed with the parts they were right about. And the parts they were not right about. I didn't argue with those, she said. I just didn't agree with them either. He was quiet for a moment. Then he came into the room and looked at the desk, at the notes she had been working through. He did not touch anything. He looked at it the way she had noticed him look at a great many things, as though he were reading it rather than simply seeing it. The Grayford Fork case, he said, looking at one of the maps. You have extended the survey line here. He pointed, not quite touching the paper. Yes. The adjustment for the tributary move changes the valid reference point for the eastern marker. If you redraw the line from the corrected anchor, the disputed section resolves to about 60 yards of ground that neither pack was actually farming anyway. They were arguing about something that neither of them wanted. He straightened. He was looking at her again. How long did that take you? This morning, she said. An hour, maybe. He said nothing for a moment. She waited. I have had that case for 4 months, he said. I had the corrected survey notes, she said. Without those, you could not have done what I did. The error was in the source material, not in the analysis. He looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as the one he wore when he was deciding something. Not uncertain, deciding, as though the conclusion was forming and he was watching it take shape. "Come to the afternoon session," he said. "Bring the notes." "I was going to," she said. Something in his face shifted, something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. There, and gone, very fast, before the composure came back. "Good," he said. He left. She sat at the desk and looked at the map and felt the strange, unbalancing sensation of not knowing quite what was happening, which was not a feeling she spent much time with. She knew what was happening in the border disputes. She knew what was happening in the 3-day timeline and in Lennox Arden's garden. She knew the terrain of this compound with increasing accuracy. What she did not know was what was happening in the moment when Calum looked at her survey notes and said, "I have had that case for 4 months," in the particular voice he had used, which was not the voice of a king discussing administrative business. It was the voice of someone who was surprised, and not accustomed to being surprised, and not entirely sure what to do with the sensation. She did not know that terrain yet. She went to the afternoon session and she brought the notes, and the Grayford Fork case was resolved in the 3rd hour of the meeting, and 2 other cases, in which she spotted errors in the underlying survey data, were moved forward significantly, and Gareth Cole said something to Calum at the end of the session that she was not close enough to hear. In the evening, at the formal dinner for the 2nd night of the gathering, Lennox Arden sat at the high table with a smile so perfectly maintained it had the quality of something structural. Brea Whitmore cut her food with precise movements. Clara Voss watched Mara from 3 seats away, with an expression that had shifted, fractionally but unmistakably, since the morning. Something had changed in the room. Mara could feel it the way you feel a change in elevation, in the pressure of the air, in the subtle difference in how sound moves through a space at higher ground. The weight of the room was redistributing. She did not know yet whether that was good. She looked at the remaining disputed cases in her notes, which she had kept on her knee under the table, with the habit of someone who did not like to leave work unfinished. 1 day left in the gathering. She was going to use it. The rider arrived at dawn on the 3rd day. Mara heard the horse in the courtyard below her window, and got up to look. In the gray morning light, a man in travel-stained clothing dismounted, and handed something to the guard at the east entrance. The guard went inside quickly. Mara watched him go and then looked at the rider, who had the bearing of someone who had been moving fast for a long time, and was allowing himself, now that he had stopped, to look tired. She dressed and went downstairs. By the time she reached the main corridor, she could hear Calum's voice in the receiving room, low and direct, asking questions in rapid sequence. She stopped in the corridor. She was not going to walk into a room where the king was receiving what was clearly a military report. That was not her place, and she knew it. She stood in the corridor and waited, because the alternative was going back to her room and working through survey notes that she had essentially finished, and she wanted to know what was happening. Gareth Cole came out of the receiving room and nearly walked into her. He stopped. He looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with him when something had shifted, in a way he had not calculated for. It was an expression she was becoming familiar with. "Miss Finch, what has happened?" she asked. He hesitated for exactly 1 second, which told her it was serious, and that he was deciding how much to say. "A border skirmish," he said. "The northern edge of the Central Territory. The Greymount Post." She knew Greymount from the maps. It was a high pass, narrow, good defensive ground but isolated. It had been a disputed point for longer than she had been working in the region. "How bad?" "Contained," Gareth said. "So far." The door to the receiving room opened, and Calum came out, with the focused, forward-carrying energy of someone who had already made a decision and was in the process of executing it. He looked at her in the corridor. "You heard. Some of it." She paused. "Go. Handle it." He held still for a second. She had the impression she had said something he had not expected, though she could not have said why he would have expected anything else. He was a king. The border was in difficulty. Of course he went. "The gathering concludes today," Gareth said. "The formal recording." "The formal recording happens at noon," Calum said. He was looking at Mara. "I will be back before noon." "And if you are not?" she asked. "I will be back before noon," he said again. He left. She stood in the corridor, and listened to the organized sound of departure. Horses, commands, the movement of a small but purposeful party assembling in the courtyard. She went to the east-facing window at the end of the corridor and watched them go through the main gate in the early light. Calum at the front without looking back, the gate closing behind them. She went to her room and ate the breakfast Petra brought, and thought about what Crispin Dale had told her about the formal recording, and about what happened if it did not occur before the gathering concluded. If it did not happen, she thought, there would be another calculation to make. She had been in the middle of a calculation since she sat down in that throne, and she had been running it alongside everything else, in the background, the way you run maps in your mind while you talk about something else. She had been running the numbers on what she wanted, and what was happening, and what the shape of things actually was, beneath the ceremony, and the politics, and the 3 women in the garden. She had not finished that calculation. She picked up her pen and went back to the survey notes, because unfinished work was unfinished work, and waiting was easier with something real to do. Calum's war maps were on the second desk she had not looked at closely before, the smaller desk between the window and the bookshelf. She had noticed them when she first came into the room, a roll of heavy paper partly unfurled with a stone weight holding one corner, but she had not looked at them because they were not her work and this was not her room. She looked at them now. She looked at the map on the desk, and she thought about Greymount Pass, and she pulled her own survey notes from the Eastern Region folder, because the survey she had been given covered the boundary lines, and the notes included elevation data that she had been using for the marker dispute. She did not touch his maps. She set her notes beside them, and looked from one to the other. There was an error. It was not a small one. The approach route to Greymount on Calum's war map showed a secondary path along the northern ridge that had been marked as clear ground. She had data in her survey notes, from a landslide survey done 4 months ago, showing that the northern ridge path was impassable. A significant portion of the trail had collapsed. There were new measurements in the notes, new elevation readings, and they contradicted the route marked on his map completely. She sat with this for a moment. Then she found 2 more errors. One was a ford crossing, marked as stable, that her notes showed had been undermined by the same period of flooding that had shifted the tributary. The other was a secondary posting station, marked on the map that, according to the latest regional survey, had been abandoned and dismantled. 3 errors, all of them in the territory between here and Greymount Pass. She looked at the door. She looked at the errors on the map. She looked at the time. She did not know how long it would take him to reach the border. She did not know whether these routes were ones he planned to use. She did not know whether someone in his military staff had already flagged these issues, or whether, like the boundary dispute at the Greyford Fork, the source material had simply never been updated. She thought about the Greyford Fork and about a problem that had sat for 4 months because no one had the corrected survey in front of them. She picked up her pen. She corrected the maps. She did not rewrite them because she did not want to touch his charts beyond what was necessary. She made corrections in a clear, small hand in the margins, with the standard survey notation she used on all her work, noting the source and date of each corrected measurement. She wrote the updated elevation figures for the northern ridge path. She wrote the current status of the ford crossing. She noted the dismantled posting station and provided the nearest active one from the updated regional record. She worked for an hour. When she was done, the maps were still his. They just had better information on them. She put her pen down and looked at what she had done and thought about whether she should have done it, whether it was appropriate, whether it overstepped, whether he would see it as interference or as help. She thought about 3 errors that could complicate a military movement and decided that the question of whether it was her place was less important than the question of whether the information was correct. The information was correct. She had checked it twice. She left the maps on the desk and went back to her survey notes. He came back at 11:15. She heard the horses in the courtyard again, and the sound of a party dismounting, and voices in the main corridor below. She did not go down this time. She stayed at the desk and worked, and waited. His boots on the stairs were unhurried. She had noticed that about him. In the 2.5 days since she had met him, he did not move urgently, except in genuinely urgent moments, and even then it was purposeful, rather than rushed. He knocked again, which she still found slightly surprising. She said, "Come in." He came in. He was travel-worn, not heavily so, but the morning had been in the field, and it showed in small ways. A smudge on his sleeve, his hair less perfectly arranged than it had been at breakfast, a quality of alertness in his eyes that said the body had been working, even if the face was composed. He looked at the desk, he looked at the maps. He crossed to them and stood looking at the corrections in the margins. She watched him read them. She watched him go still, in a particular way, as he understood what he was looking at. He was quiet for a long time. The Northern Ridge Path, he said, collapsed. 4 months ago, approximately. The landslide data is in the survey notes. My route used it. I know. He looked at the second correction, the ford. Undermined, the same flooding event that shifted the Grayford tributary affected 2 other crossing points in that region. The updated measurements are in the notes. He looked at the third correction. He read it. He set the map down and looked at her. When did you do this? He said. This morning, she said, after you left. I was not going to touch your maps, but there were 3 errors, and you had ridden toward them. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not the calculating look, and it was not the deciding look. She did not have a word for it yet. The Northern Ridge Path, he said again. We used the main road. We did not take the ridge, but the ford. He paused. We were planning to use the ford at Greymount Creek on the return. She said nothing. We would have found out when we got there, he said. It was not reassurance. It was the plain statement of someone who knew that field problems get solved in the field. Yes, she said. But finding out at the ford takes time you might not have. He looked at the corrections again. Then he looked at her again. Miss Finch, he said. Mara, she said. She had told him her name on the first day, and he had used it precisely once since, and she was not going to spend however long this lasted being Miss Finch. Mara is fine. Something in his face did what it had done the day before, that fast movement like a change in weather, there and gone. Mara, he said. The Greymount situation, she said. Is it handled? For now. There will need to be a proper response, but the immediate issue is contained. He was still looking at the maps, the Northern Ridge Path, if we had needed to move quickly. You would have found out at the ridge, she said, and lost the time. He nodded. Once. The kind of nod that was also an acknowledgement of something more than the words. Thank you, he said. His voice was very flat and very direct, the way all his direct statements were, with nothing underneath them trying to be more or less than what they were. The formal recording is at noon, she said. You should change your sleeve. He looked down at the smudge. Something crossed his face that she genuinely could not categorize. Yes, he said. He left. She sat at the desk and looked at the corrected maps and thought about what it meant, that she had done that. That she had looked at his maps without permission and improved them without asking, that it had been the right thing to do, and she had done it anyway, and he had said thank you, with the voice of someone who was not accustomed to being helped in small, specific, quiet ways. She thought about borders, about how, in cartography, the most interesting thing was never the line itself, but the ground on either side of it, and what moved across it without being recorded. She thought about what was moving across the line between them. She did not name it, not yet. She picked up her pen and finished her survey notes, because the work was still there and it still mattered, and because it was 12 minutes to noon and she needed to be downstairs. She was not going to be late again. The formal recording happened at noon exactly. The gathering's third day concluded. The declaration was entered in the pack records by the hand of Gareth Cole, in ink that dried to a dark and permanent brown, in a book that Mara was told had held records like this one for 340 years. Gareth read the entry aloud in the formal old language of the 5 packs, and she stood beside Calum on the dais and listened to words she mostly could not follow, but understood in their shape, in their weight. It was done. She had expected to feel something sharp about that, something alarmed. She had been waiting for the alarm, for the tightening in the chest that came when a situation moved past the point where you could still steer it back. But what she felt instead was quieter and less easily named, like stepping onto a bridge and finding it solid beneath your feet. She did not entirely trust the feeling. She noted it and kept going. The gathering dissolved over the course of the afternoon. The pack representatives departed in their organized groups. the tiered grounds emptying, with the particular efficiency of people who had done this before, and knew exactly how many hours remained before the roads would be crowded. She watched from the eastern walkway as the compound cleared. Lennox Arden left mid-afternoon. She found Mara in the walkway, with Brea Whitmore 2 steps behind, and Clara Voss a few steps further, and she gave her a farewell that was perfectly polished, and said nothing at all, and Mara returned it in kind. Clara Voss separated from the other 2 at the gate, and turned back once. She looked at Mara from across the now quiet courtyard, at a distance too far for expression to read. Then she turned and walked out through the gate. Mara watched her go. After the grounds cleared, the residence felt very different, larger somehow, in the way spaces feel after crowds leave. The quiet was its own texture, different from the held silence of the ceremony, just quiet. Petra showed her to a different room. A permanent room, she said, on the upper residential floor, looking out over the eastern gardens rather than the courtyard. It was the same size as the guest room but arranged differently, with more shelves and a wider desk, and a window seat lined with a single dark blue cushion. Mara's bag, which she had carried herself through 3 days, was already there. She stood in the room and looked at the wider desk and thought that she was going to need considerably more survey materials. She wrote to Aldous that evening. She wrote it carefully and at length, because Aldous deserved a careful letter and because writing it helped her understand what had happened in a different way than just living through it had. She told him about the throne. She told him about the bond. She told him about the boundary disputes and the corrected maps and what she had observed in the council session. She told him that she was staying and why, and that she needed the Eastern Region Survey archive sent to the residents, the full archive, not just the active cases. She told him she was not sure what she was doing, but she was doing it on purpose. She folded the letter and left it for the morning post, and sat at the wide desk in the room that was now, in some administrative sense at least, her room, and felt the strange, unfamiliar quality of a situation she had not caused, but had stopped trying to escape. The nights in the residence after the gathering were quieter than the nights during it. She adjusted. She learned the schedule of the building, the hours when Calum met with Gareth and the council, the hours when the staff moved through different parts of the building, the way the fire basins in the courtyard were lit at dusk and banked at midnight. She worked. The Eastern Archive arrived 5 days after her letter to Aldous, in 4 heavy crates that 2 delivery men carried up the stairs, with expressions that suggested she had ordered a significant number of bricks. She organized it by region and by year and by survey type, and spent 3 days cataloging it, and felt, during those 3 days, the particular deep pleasure of a large organizational task done well. Calum had a habit of appearing in the doorway to her room at odd hours. Not intrusively. He knocked. He looked at whatever she was working on. Sometimes he asked questions. More often he just looked, with that reading expression, taking in the shape of things. One evening in the 2nd week, she asked him about the Greymount situation, and he told her, with the same directness he used for everything, that it was being managed, and that the underlying political problem behind the skirmish, a pack council that had been rotating leadership too fast and losing institutional knowledge, was going to take longer to address. She asked whether he had updated the regional maps with the corrected survey data. He said he had. She asked whether his staff had a reliable source for updated survey material. He said they used the regional offices. She told him the regional offices had a 2-year lag at minimum and were not always reliable about logging landslide and flood events. She said that if he wanted, she could set up a direct correspondence with the field surveyors in the 3 most strategically relevant territories, which would give him a reliable source of updated ground truth data within weeks of any significant change. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Do that. She did that. It took a week to set up the correspondence chains, and another week before the first updated reports started coming in. But they came in, and she added them to the archive, and started a separate set of working maps that she kept on the right side of the wide desk, updated in real time as reports arrived. She stopped thinking of them as his maps, and started thinking of them as the maps. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, the archive room became where they talked. She did not know how it started, exactly. She thought it was something about tea. Petra had left a pot at the side table, and she had been too absorbed in the archive to stop for it, and it had gone cold, and she had said something about it, when Calum appeared in the doorway in the early evening, and he had come in and sat in the chair by the shelves that she had started thinking of as the reading chair, because he used it when he looked at maps, and she had poured cold tea for both of them, and neither of them had commented on the coldness, and they had talked about the southern boundary adjustments for 2 hours. After that, it became a thing that happened. Not every night, 3 or 4 times a week, in the early evening. Cold tea, or wine when Petra anticipated the situation correctly and left a bottle. Maps on the desk. The lamp making the room smaller and warmer than it actually was. She learned things about him in those evenings. Not personal things, not at first. Professional things. The way his mind moved through a problem, which was not the way she would have predicted from watching him in council sessions. He was patient in the council room, measured and slow, letting others reach conclusions before he stated his own. In the archive room he was faster, more direct, cutting to the shape of a problem quickly once he trusted the information. He trusted her information. She noticed this with the same calibrating attention she noticed everything. One evening, toward the end of the 3rd week, she was telling him about a survey discrepancy she had found in the Western records. A particular village that appeared on every survey before a certain date and then simply was not on surveys after it. She had been puzzling over it for 2 days. It appeared to have been a deliberate exclusion, which was unusual, because survey errors were usually mistakes rather than decisions. She explained it the way she explained most survey problems, methodically, moving through the data, working up to the question. She explained it for perhaps 3 minutes before she realized she had stopped talking about the survey. She had started talking about Ashmere. She did not know exactly when it had happened. One moment she was describing the pattern of exclusion from Western records, and then she was describing what she recognized about the pattern, and then she was saying the name of the village she had grown up in, and Calum was very still across the desk from her. Ashmere had been a border village, small, 40 families at most, in years that were good. It had sat at the edge of disputed territory for as long as anyone could remember, and when the territory changed hands after a council agreement she had been too young to understand, the village had been on the wrong side of the new line. That was the administrative description of what happened. On paper it was clean, a line moved, territory transferred. On the ground it was a fire that started before dawn on a January morning, and a family that ran with what they could carry, and a long cold walk to the nearest town where no one was waiting for them. She was 12 years old. She said this flatly, not looking at him, with the cadence of someone reciting measurements from a survey that had already been done, the language of facts. Not because she did not feel it, but because the language of facts was what she had left after the language of feelings had proven not to be load-bearing. She said, there was a village. It was taken off the maps. She said, she had put it back on every map she had ever made since. She stopped talking. The lamp between them was low. The wine in her glass was mostly untouched. Outside, the fire basins in the courtyard were burning at their evening height. Calum was looking at her. He was not looking at her with pity, which she had expected, and which she would have had difficulty with. He was not looking at her with the careful managed sympathy she had seen on people's faces when they heard things like this and did not know what to do with them. He was looking at her with something that had no professional distance in it at all. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, I have ordered things like that. She looked at him. Not Ashmere, but things with the same shape. His voice was the same flat, direct voice he always used. He was not softening it. Lines moved. Territory transferred. I have sat in a council room and agreed to the administrative version of what happened, and I was not standing on the ground when it did. The lamp was quiet between them. She looked at him. He looked back at her. She understood, in that moment, that they were in different positions in the same story, and they both knew it, and neither of them was going to pretend otherwise. That was not easier, but it was more honest than easier, and she had a long-standing preference for honesty over ease. She picked up her wine. He picked up his. They sat in the lamplit room with the maps between them, and the fire basins burning in the courtyard outside, and neither of them said anything else for a while. They did not need to. The thing had been said, and the silence after it was a different kind of silence than anything she had been in yet in this building. Not a public silence, or a ceremonial one. Just the silence of two people sitting with something real. She went to sleep late that night. She lay in the room with the window seat and looked at the ceiling, and thought about lines on maps and the distances between them and the ground underneath them that the lines did not know about. She thought about 12 years old and cold and a long walk. She thought about what he had said. I have ordered things like that. Not an excuse, not a justification, not even an apology. Just the acknowledgement of a person who understood that acknowledging things was its own act. She thought about the survey correspondence she had set up, the chains of field reporters sending in real-time ground data so that the maps could know what the ground actually was, so that the line and the land might correspond. She thought about whether that was naive. She decided it was not naive. It was work. Work that made things more accurate. More accurate was better than less accurate, and she did not need to resolve every complicated question to be certain of that. She went to sleep. In the morning she went back to the archive, because the village problem was still there and she had not finished solving it, and she was not going to leave a survey problem unresolved just because she had told the truth about it in the evening. She put her pen on the paper. She put the village back. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the gathering. Mara was at the wide desk with 3 active maps and 2 cups of tea, 1 hot and 1 cold, and she was in the middle of reconciling a route discrepancy in the southern border survey when Petra came in with the letter on a small tray. The tray seemed unnecessary, but Petra had a particular way of carrying things of significance on trays, and the tray had therefore become, in Mara's reading of the household's code, a signal. She looked at the letter. Heavy cream paper, sealed with the mark of the Northern Pack. She set down her pen. She opened the letter. It was 3 paragraphs. The language was formal and old, and she had to read it twice to be sure she had understood correctly. Then she read it a 3rd time, because understanding it correctly was worse than misunderstanding it, and she wanted to be certain. She went downstairs. Gareth Cole was in the corridor outside the council room, which was convenient. She held the letter out to him. What is this? He took it and read it, and she watched his face do the thing it did when something had moved outside the parameters he had planned for. He was quiet for too long. Tell me what it is, she said. He looked up. It is a formal invocation of the mate's trial. She waited. It is an ancient protocol, he said. He was choosing words carefully, which she had come to understand as the sign that the situation was more serious than his tone was indicating. Historically, it was a safeguard. Before the fated mate bond was understood as fully as it is now, there were cases where the bond declaration was made in error. The trial was a method of verification. And someone is invoking it. Lennox Arden, he said. As elder representative of the Northern Pack, she has the standing to do so. What does the trial require? He was quiet again for a moment that was slightly too long. It requires the declared mate to demonstrate that they can navigate the bond's responsibilities, he said. Historically, the trial involved leading the Alpha through contested territory, using knowledge and instinct, without guides, without maps. He paused, and she understood that the pause was significant. It was designed for wolves, for a mate with wolf instincts and pack knowledge built over a lifetime. It was designed, she said, to be very difficult for a human. He did not say no. She took the letter back from him. She looked at it again. The formal old language, the precise invocation of the protocol number, the cited historical precedent. It had been prepared carefully, not recently. The precision of it spoke to time spent, to documents consulted, to a case built slowly and thoroughly before being deployed. Clara Voss, she thought. The silence in the garden, the eyes that watched and said almost nothing. What are the terms if I fail? She asked. The bond is declared invalid. The Alpha King has a moon cycle to name a formal mate through council process. And if I don't attempt it? Refusal of a valid invocation is treated as a forfeiture. Same outcome. She looked at the letter. She looked at the 3-paragraph construction of it, and at the precision with which it had been assembled, and she thought about a woman who had been watching for 15 years, and who knew exactly which words to use. When does it have to happen? Within 7 days of the invocation. And Calum. She paused. Does he have any authority to block it? Gareth Cole's expression answered that before he did. He can formally contest the invocation with the council. But an elder invocation of the trial is one of the oldest protocols in pack law. The grounds for contest are narrow, and any contest requires a full council hearing, which takes longer than 7 days. She looked at him. So the contest cannot outrun the deadline. No. She folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket. She said thank you to Gareth Cole, who looked at her with the expression of a man who was, she thought, genuinely uncertain how to feel about her, and had been from the beginning, and was narrowing toward something. She went back upstairs. She did not go to the archive room. She went to the window seat in her room, and she sat with the letter in her pocket and the courtyard below, and thought very carefully. She thought about the Northern Ridge path. She thought about the ford at Greymount Creek. She thought about the dismantled posting station and the corrected elevation data and the landslide survey from 4 months ago. She thought about 6 years of working across wolf territories. She thought about the roads she had walked and the boundaries she had verified and the way she had moved through unfamiliar ground, always cataloging, always taking measurements, always building the picture of a place from the ground up before she tried to understand it from above. She thought about contested territory. She opened her mouth and then closed it, because there was no one in the room to say anything to, and the habit of talking things through was one she had mostly not yet established here. She reached for the pull cord that would bring Petra. Then she stopped. She pulled her coat on, and went down the stairs and out through the east corridor, and across the inner courtyard to the building wing, where Calum's private office was. She knocked. "Come in," he said. She came in. He was at his desk, which was large and dark and positioned to face the room rather than the wall. He looked up. He read her face, which she knew was not an especially expressive face, but he had learned in 6 weeks to read it the way she had learned to read his. He held out his hand. She gave him the letter. He read it. He did not hurry. When he finished, he set it on the desk, and he looked at it for a moment before he looked at her. "Lennox Arden," he said. "The language is Clara Voss," she said. "But yes." He was quiet. "Gareth told me you cannot contest it in time," she said. "I know. He told me what the trial involves. I know. I know. That too." Something in his voice was very flat. Not calm, controlled. There was a difference. "I am sorry. I should have been prepared for this. I should have anticipated." "There is no use in that now," she said. It came out firmly, and she meant it to. "Tell me what the trial actually is. Not the formal description. What it actually is." He looked at her. He was deciding something. She could see it. "It is a navigation challenge," he said. "The declared mate leads the Alpha King through a stretch of contested pack territory, in the dark, without external guidance. The traditional version spans 3 territories. The trial ends when the Alpha reaches a specific marker point designated by the Council." He paused. "It is designed around wolf instinct, pack sense, the ability to navigate by something that humans do not have." "What do I have instead?" she said. He looked at her. "What? I am asking what I have instead of wolf instinct, what the trial is actually measuring that I might be able to measure in a different way." He was still for a moment, and she could see him following the thought. "The mate leads the Alpha," he said slowly. "The Alpha follows. The territory spans the border between the northern and eastern packs, which is contested ground. The marker point is at the old standing stone at Greymount Ridge." She looked at him. Greymount Ridge, the Northern Ridge path. The one on his war map that she had corrected 6 weeks ago from the landslide survey. "I know that ridge," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I have the survey data for everything between here and that standing stone," she said. "Every elevation change. Every landmark. Every path, including the ones that are no longer passable, and the ones that are. I have had it for 6 weeks. I have been sending it to field correspondents, and getting updates since I set up the correspondence chains." He said nothing for a long moment. She kept going. "I cannot navigate like a wolf. I have no instinct about that territory." She paused. "But I can navigate like a cartographer. And I have more current, more accurate information about that ground than anyone in this building except me." She looked at him directly. "The trial is designed so that a human cannot do it without wolf instincts, but it was designed a very long time ago. It assumed that the only way to know the ground was to feel it." She let him reach the rest of it himself. She could see him doing it. "You know it," he said. "Not a question. I know every boundary stone on that route. I know the current elevation of the Northern Ridge. I know which paths are passable tonight and which ones are not. I know where the contested line actually falls, not where it is marked on outdated records." He was very quiet. "I want to try," she said. He looked at her for a long time. She held it. She was good at holding it, at not filling silence to make someone else comfortable. If you fail, he started. I know what happens if I fail, she said. Gareth told me. She held his gaze. I do not intend to fail. He looked at the letter on his desk. He looked at her. I need to read you into the formal trial requirements, he said. Every constraint, every condition. Tell me, she said. She sat down in the chair across from him. All of it. He told her all of it. It took an hour. She asked 12 questions. He answered all 12. She made notes, not on his desk, but in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket, with dates and waypoints and the specific language of the trial's conditions. When he was done, she read back her notes to him to verify she had understood correctly. He confirmed each point. She closed her notebook. When do I need to give them my answer? Formally, within 3 days. Give them my answer tomorrow, she said. I accept the trial. He looked at her. I need 4 days to prepare, she said. They have given me 7. I will use 4 of them to be certain, and then I will go on the 5th. He was still looking at her with something she could not fully catalog. What do you need? He asked. My archive, she said. All the current field reports. A full set of the updated maps as they stand today. Uninterrupted time in the archive room for the next 4 days. She paused. And I need someone to test me on the route. Someone who knows the territory, who can ask me about it and check my answers against their knowledge. He looked at the letter on his desk. He looked at her. I know that territory, he said. I know it well. Then you test me, she said. Something moved across his face and settled. All right, he said. She stood. She picked up her notebook. She went to the door, and then she stopped, because there was a thing she needed to say, and she was going to say it while her voice was still even. I know this is not how you planned for this to go, she said. The bond, all of it. She looked at the door, rather than at him. I have been learning what that means for 6 weeks. I am still learning, but I am not going to stand outside this trial and let 3 women, who planned for it for 15 years, take the decision out of my hands. She paused. It is my decision to make, not theirs. She felt him looking at her back. She went out the door. She went to the archive room, and she spread the maps across the wide desk, and she started working. She had 4 days. She intended to know that ground better than the wolves who had grown up running it. The 4 days she had promised herself were the most intense days of work she had ever done. She did not stop working to eat. Petra brought food to the archive room, and she ate at the desk without looking up from the maps. She slept in 4-hour stretches, and woke before the alarm she had set in her head, and went back to the desk, while the building was still dark. The archive she had built over 6 weeks became a different kind of resource now. She had been building it systematically, methodically, for the purpose of accurate record-keeping. Now she used it like something else, like a map she was going to walk with her body, in the dark, without being able to look at it. She memorized. She was good at memorization. Cartography demanded it, the ability to hold a space in your mind with enough precision that you could move through it even when you could not see it. She had done this with buildings, with towns, with small border territories. She had never done it with a stretch of ground this large or this consequential. The route from the designated start point to the standing stone at Greymount Ridge covered approximately 11 miles of contested territory, passing through the overlap between northern and eastern pack boundaries, crossing 2 ridgelines, navigating 2 stream crossings, and ending at a position that had been a contested reference point in pack records for 60 years. She mapped it. Then she memorized the map. Then she checked the memorized version against the map and found 3 gaps and memorized those. Calum tested her in the evenings. He came to the archive room at 7 each evening, and for 2 hours he asked her questions about the route. Not from a map, from his own knowledge of the ground, which was deep and detailed, the knowledge of someone who had moved through that territory, on foot and on horseback, and under difficult conditions many times over many years. He asked about landmarks she might not have in her records. She answered from the field reports. When she did not know something, she said so, and they found the relevant data together, and she added it to her working memory. When she did know something, she gave him the answer, and then the source, and he verified it against his own recollection, with a brevity that told her whether she was right. By the third evening, she was answering faster. By the fourth evening, she was sometimes answering before he had finished asking. On the fourth evening, he stopped asking at the usual hour, and just sat in the chair by the shelves and looked at the working maps she had made. Not his standard war maps, her route maps, drawn specifically for this, with every current survey notation and field update incorporated. 11 miles of ground reduced to a series of verified checkpoints. Every major decision point, marked with the current status of the path and the available alternatives. She had drawn them like all her best maps. Precisely, clearly, without unnecessary information. Only what you needed to find your way. He looked at them for a long time. You could navigate this in daylight, he said. I need to navigate it in the dark, she said. That is the condition. You will not be looking at these maps during the trial. No, she did not look at the maps either, because she was past needing to. She was looking at the space above them, at nothing in particular, which was how she knew she had internalized something, when she could close her eyes and still find it. But I will know where I am. He was quiet. Are you ready? He said. She had been thinking about what ready meant for 4 days. Whether it was a state you reached or a decision you made. I know the route, she said. I know it well. I will not know until I am on it, whether that is enough. That is the truest thing anyone has said about the trial in a long time, he said. She looked at him. Have others done it recently? The last formal trial was 82 years ago, he said. My grandmother's elder records describe it. He paused. The declared mate at the time was a wolf from the Eastern Pack who failed at the second ridgeline and came back disoriented. She absorbed this. And the outcome? The bond was declared invalid. The Alpha at the time named a council-approved mate within the moon cycle. She looked at the maps she was past needing to look at. What happened to the declared mate? He was quiet for a moment. She returned to the Eastern Pack. She lived well, I believe. The records do not say much after the trial. But she was all right. As far as the records show. She nodded. She had wanted to know that. She had not admitted to herself until now that she had wanted to know that. What happened if she failed? Not in the formal procedural sense, but in the human sense. I am not planning to fail, she said. I know, he said. And then, quietly, in a voice that was not the formal direct voice but something underneath it, I know you are not. The trial was set for the following night. The invocation required darkness and contested ground, and the council had designated the start point at the Northern Pack's eastern marker, which was 6 miles northeast of the residence compound. They left the compound at dusk, which meant arriving at the start point after nightfall. She rode with Calum and Gareth Cole, and a small group of official witnesses. Lennox Arden was already at the start point when they arrived, with Brea Whitmore and Clara Voss, and 4 witnesses from the Northern Pack. The formality of the gathering there had a quality she recognized from the ceremony at the gathering grounds. Held, organized, significant. Mara stood with her hands in her coat pockets and looked at the terrain she could see in the low light of the witness torches. The ground was what she had expected, rolling, rocky in places, with the first ridgeline visible as a darkening against the sky 2 miles northeast. The official trial keeper, an older man from the council named Prentice, read the trial conditions aloud in formal language. Gareth Cole acknowledged them on behalf of the Alpha King. Lennox Arden acknowledged them on behalf of the invocation. No one acknowledged them on behalf of Mara. The conditions did not require it. Prentice looked at her. Are you prepared to begin? She looked at Calum. He was standing 2 feet to her left, looking ahead at the dark ground beyond the torchlight. He had said nothing since they left the horses. He was wearing field clothes, practical and dark, with his ceremonial clasp removed. He looked like a man who was going to walk difficult ground, not like a king. Yes, she said. The torches stayed at the start point. That was the condition. No external light. She turned away from the torchlight and faced the dark. For exactly 3 seconds, the dark was absolute. Then her eyes began adjusting, and the world returned in shades of gray, the ridgeline against the slightly lighter sky, the ground underfoot distinguishing itself from the darkness by texture, and by the pale catch of what moonlight reached the ground through the cover above. She began to walk. She heard Calum fall into step beside her. She did not look at him. She looked ahead. The first checkpoint was the small rock formation at the base of the northern ridgeline, which the field survey described as a cluster of 3 stones. the tallest of which was approximately chest height, set slightly to the east of the most direct path. She had memorized the bearing from the start point. She walked on that bearing. The ground was uneven but not treacherous. She moved at a careful pace, not slow but not rushed, the pace of someone who knew where they were going and was not going to make mistakes for the sake of speed. At 12 minutes she found the rock formation, exactly where it should have been. She turned northeast, toward the ridgeline approach. Calum had still said nothing. She could hear him behind her and slightly to her left. His footstep was quiet, which she had not expected in a man his size, but she thought perhaps that was a wolf thing, the body knowing how to move on ground it had walked before. The ridgeline approach took 40 minutes. The updated survey data had shown her that the direct path, the one on the older maps, was compromised in 2 places by erosion, and she had memorized the detour, adding 12 minutes to the approach but keeping them on stable ground. She took the detour without explaining it. At the top of the first ridgeline she stopped. She could see the territory laid out ahead in the darkness, the second ridgeline 2 miles further northeast, the shallow valley between them. She oriented herself by the shape of the skyline, which she had memorized from the topographic data, and confirmed her position. She was exactly where she expected to be. Something in her chest eased, very slightly, and then tightened again, because she had 2 ridgelines still ahead, and she was not done. The detour on the approach, Calum said, beside her. It was the first thing he had said since they left the starting point. The direct path is eroded, she said. There is a gully, cut across the lower section, about 3 feet deep. The field survey from 2 months ago flagged it. He was quiet for a moment. I used that path 2 years ago, he said. It was passable 2 years ago, she said. It is not passable now. She started down the other side of the ridge. The valley between the 2 ridgelines was the longest section, roughly a mile across. The ground here was more open, and the moon, which had been obscured on the approach, came clearer as the tree cover thinned. She moved with more confidence in the clearer light. The stream crossing was in the valley. She had anticipated it as the most uncertain point in the route, because stream crossings were the things that changed most between one survey and the next. She had her most recent field report on this crossing, which was 2 weeks old. She found the crossing point. It was lower than she had expected, and wider, which told her water level was higher than the 2-week-old report, which made sense given the rain earlier in the week. She stood at the edge for 10 seconds, reading the current, looking at the opposite bank. She moved 40 yards upstream, which she had identified as an alternative crossing point with a shallow ford. The field report had listed it as secondary and less convenient. It was also the correct choice tonight. She crossed it. She heard Calum cross behind her. On the far bank she kept moving without stopping, because they had time but she was not going to waste it. Second ridgeline took 35 minutes. No detours needed here, but the path crossed contested ground at one point, where the boundary line between the northern and eastern packs was genuinely ambiguous, and she stayed to the east of the old stone post, which she had identified from the archive records as the legally solid reference point until the boundary dispute was formally resolved. Calum said, coming over the ridge behind her. You went east of the marker post. The western side is contested territory, she said. The trial conditions specify contested ground must be navigated, not that we are required to walk in the disputed section when there is a valid alternative. He said nothing for a moment, then, that is correct. She went down the second ridgeline. The standing stone was in a clearing at the far side of the descent, a single tall stone that had been there for longer than any pack record she had found. It was visible from 30 yards out, pale and solid in the moonlight, taller than she had expected from the measurements in the survey. She walked to it. She put her hand flat against the stone. It was cold and very solid, and slightly rough under her palm. She turned around. Calum was standing 6 feet away, and the witnesses who had been following at a mandated distance of 50 yards were visible at the edge of the clearing, their figures small in the dark. Calum was looking at her. He did not say anything for a moment. You navigated by the stream upstream to the ford, he said. The main crossing was too high. The ford. You knew it from a field report. 2 weeks old. And you trusted a 2-week-old report in the dark. I trusted it, and I checked it when I arrived and adjusted, she said. That is not the same as trusting blindly. He was quiet. The witnesses were moving toward the stone now. the formal approach of the council observers required to confirm the completion of the trial. "You led me home," he said, quietly, not loudly enough for the witnesses to hear, just to her. She looked at him. "I led you where you needed to go," she said. "That is what the trial required." The witnesses reached the stone. Prentice began the formal completion language, the old words that recorded the trial's outcome in the living witness testimony that Pack law required. She stood beside the stone, with the cold of it against her shoulder, and let the words wash over her. She did not look at Lennox Arden, who was among the witnesses. She did not need to. She looked at the standing stone and thought about the survey that listed it, and the archive that held the survey, and the field reports that had kept the archive current. She had known this ground before she walked it. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. You did not need wolf instincts if you had done the work of knowing. Prentice finished the formal words and looked at her, and then at Calum. "The trial is completed," he said. "The declaration stands." And then there was a sound, not planned, not organized, but real, coming from the witnesses who had walked behind them through 11 miles of dark and contested ground. A low, steady, unified sound that she had heard once before, in a very different context. In the gathering grounds, the first day, when 2,000 wolves understood that something had happened that had not happened in a very long time. It was quieter now. 12 witnesses, not 2,000. But it carried the same weight. The acknowledgement of something that the body understood before the mind caught up. Mara looked at the standing stone, and then at the dark sky above it. She thought, "I knew the way." She thought, "I always know the way." She thought, that might be enough. It was cold on the ridge. Her feet were wet from the stream crossing. Her coat had a burr on the left sleeve from the upper ridge approach. She was very tired. It had been enough. The formal dissolution of the challenge was processed through the council in 2 days. Mara spent those 2 days in the archive room, the same as she had spent most of the past 6 weeks, because there was a backlog of field reports that had come in while she was preparing for the trial, and the correspondence chains needed attention. She was aware that this was perhaps not the most expected response to having successfully completed a pack trial that 82 years of history suggested she should not have been able to complete. She was also aware that the field reports were real, and the disputed boundary cases were real, and the correspondence chains did not maintain themselves. She worked. Petra came in on the first morning, with a look that suggested she had opinions about the fact that Mara was back at the desk instead of resting. And then she looked at the number of field reports in the incoming pile, and set down the tea, and left, without expressing those opinions. Gareth Cole came in on the first afternoon, and stood in the doorway, and told her that the formal challenge dissolution document had been registered. She said thank you. He said it was a remarkable thing she had done. She said she had done the work, and the work held, and that was how it was supposed to go. And he looked at her with the expression she had been seeing more often from him recently. The one that was working through several stages of revision at once. He said he had been wrong about several things. She looked up from the reports. Which things? He considered. "I thought," he said slowly, "that the bond was not an error, exactly, but a complication, something that would require management." He paused. "I have managed things for 30 years. I was already calculating how to manage this." She waited. "I was calculating the wrong thing," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "For what it's worth," she said, "I was also calculating the wrong thing in the beginning. I was calculating how to get back to Fenwick Cross with my survey notes." Something moved in Gareth Cole's face. Not quite a smile, but the shape that precedes one. "You had very good survey notes," he said. "They turned out to be useful," she said. He left. She went back to the field reports. On the second evening, Calum came to the archive room at the usual hour. She had started a pot of tea in anticipation of it, because the hour had become reliable enough that anticipation was possible. He came in and sat in the chair by the shelves, and she poured 2 cups, hot this time, and they talked about the southern boundary adjustment for 20 minutes. Then he stopped talking about the southern boundary. She noticed the stop, the shift in register. She set down her cup and looked at him. He was looking at the maps on the desk, but he was not reading them. He was looking at the space above them. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it plainly, because I do not know how to say it otherwise." "All right," she said. He looked at her. "The bond is real," he said. I am not going to qualify that or soften it. It is what it is, and I knew it the moment I walked into the gathering grounds and you were in that throne." He paused. "But the bond is not the reason I am saying this. The bond is not the reason I am in this room most evenings. The bond is not the reason I sent the corrected maps to the southern posting stations last month." She waited. "I sent the maps," he said, "because the maps were right, and you made them right, and that matters. I come to this room because thinking is better in here than it is anywhere else in this building, and that has nothing to do with the bond. The bond is the reason I looked at you on the first day. It is not the reason I look at you now." She was very still. He kept going. "I know you did not choose this. I know you walked into those grounds to pick up survey notes and left with something you had not planned for. I know the last 6 weeks have required you to do a great deal of adjusting that you did not ask to do." He stopped. He looked at the desk. "I told you on the first day that the bond could not be renounced after the formal recording. That was true. But there are legal mechanisms available to me that are not standard. One of them, if I chose to invoke it, would effectively release you from the recorded bond. It would require a significant counsel process, and it is not commonly known, but it exists." She looked at him. "I am not suggesting you take it," he said. "I am telling you it exists, because you deserve to know it exists. You have spent 6 weeks in a situation you walked into by accident, and you have handled it with more competence and more fairness than it deserved. And you deserve to know that there is a door you have not been told about." He stopped. The lamp between them was steady and low. The courtyard fire basins were audible through the window as a soft, distant burning. She was quiet for a moment that was exactly as long as she needed. "How significant is the counsel process?" she said. "Lengthy," he said. 6 months approximately. Disruptive." She looked at the maps on the desk. Her maps. The ones she had been building and maintaining and improving for 6 weeks. The correspondence chains, and the field reports, and the updated route maps, with every current elevation verified. The archive she had organized in 4 heavy crates, which now lived on the shelves behind her, in the order she had put them in, which was not the order they had been delivered in, but was a better order. She thought about the archive. She thought about the standing stone, and her hand flat against it in the dark, cold and solid, and exactly where it was supposed to be. She thought about the evening she had told him about Ashmere, and what he had said, and what they had both sat with afterward. She thought about the council session when she had found the survey error, and the expression on his face when he looked at the corrected map that evening, when he said, "I have had that case for 4 months." She thought about the reading chair by the shelves, and cold tea and wine left by Petra, and 2 people in a lamp-lit room with maps between them, talking about borders and the ground beneath them. She thought about what it meant that she was thinking about all of these things, instead of thinking about the door he had just told her existed. "I am not going to use it," she said. He was very still. "I am not going to use it," she said again, "and not because of the bond. The bond is real. I am not arguing with that. But the bond has been real since the first day, and I have spent 6 weeks deciding what I actually think about the situation, separate from the bond, and what I think is that I am not finished here." She looked at the maps. "I am not finished with the archive. I am not finished with the correspondence chains. There are 4 active boundary disputes that are going to require updated survey work in the spring. There is the western exclusion problem I have not solved yet." She paused. "And I am not finished with whatever this is," she said, meaning the archive room and the evening hours and the reading chair and everything it represented, which she had not named, but which he clearly understood, because she could see it in his face. He was looking at her very directly. "I want to be clear," she said. "I am not staying because I have no choice. I am not staying because the bond requires it. I am staying because I walked into this place 6 weeks ago, and it became somewhere I understand. And I do not leave places I understand just because I came to them by accident." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I understand that," he said, quietly. "I know you do," she said. She picked up her cup. It was still hot. She thought about the fact that Petra had been leaving the tea hot recently, at exactly the right temperature, as though she had become quite precise about when the evening conversations in the archive room were likely to begin. She thought Petra was a very observant person. "The Western exclusion problem," Calum said, and his voice had settled back to its usual register. But there was something underneath it that was not the formal, careful register of the first days. Something that had been accumulating, she thought, for 6 weeks, the way good survey data accumulated, incrementally, from verified sources, until the picture it gave was reliable. The village pattern. Yes. You said it was a deliberate exclusion. I said the pattern suggested it, she said. I have not proven it yet. I need to pull the administrative records from the period when the exclusions began, which I am waiting for from the regional archive in Calverton. They should arrive within the week. And if it is deliberate? She thought about what that would mean. A systematic pattern of removing settlements from official records. The administrative side of what she had experienced in Ashmere, operating at a larger scale and over a longer period than she had realized. Then we fix it, she said. If we can, we put the places back. He was looking at her. You put them back, he said, and it was not quite what she had said. The pronoun was different, and she noticed the difference. She looked at him. She thought about what he had said in this room weeks ago, about the things he had ordered, about the council rooms and the lines on paper, and the ground underneath that the lines did not know about. She thought about what it was to sit across from someone who understood, not because they were the same, but because they had both looked at the same thing from opposite sides of it, and neither of them had looked away.
Yes,
she said. We put them back. She went back to the field reports. He stayed in the reading chair for another hour, going through a stack of council correspondence, and it was the same as any other evening, and it was also not the same at all, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything more about it that night. That was all right. She had not needed him to say more. She was a person who worked from evidence, and there was a great deal of evidence in the room. She sorted field reports until the lamp needed refilling. He left when the lamp went low. She refilled it and sorted another hour of reports before she stopped, because the correspondence chains were genuinely important, and she had genuinely fallen behind, and being honest with herself required admitting that some of the 3-day push before the trial had cost her ground she needed to make up. She was making it up. At midnight, she put the reports in order and covered the working maps with the felt cloth she used to protect them overnight, and turned out the lamp. She stood in the dark archive room for a moment before she went to bed. She thought about a door she had been told about and would not use. She thought about Ashmere, and a cold January morning, and a long walk. She thought about a survey archive in 4 heavy crates, reorganized in the order she had chosen, which was a better order than the one they had arrived in. She thought about the places that had been taken off the maps. She was going to put them back. All of them. Every one she could find. And she was going to do it carefully and completely, and she was going to do it here. She went to bed. She slept soundly. The Calverton archive records arrived on a Thursday, in the 2nd month, in 2 bundles tied with government cord, carried by a courier who had the expression of someone who had traveled a significant distance and expected something to show for it, beyond the 10-coin delivery fee. Mara tipped him generously and took the bundles to the archive room and untied them on the wide desk. She had been expecting the records for 3 weeks. In that time, she had continued the correspondence chains, resolved 2 of the 4 active boundary disputes through updated survey data, trained a young PAC council clerk named Owen Fitch to maintain the field report filing system while she was occupied with other things, and finished the Eastern Region cases that had brought her to the gathering grounds in the first place. Aldous had written to say that the boundary markers had been formally resolved. He had also written that her employer rate was going to have to be renegotiated, given the change in her circumstances, and that he hoped she was well, and that the Eastern Archive box she had borrowed should probably be considered donated at this point, given that she clearly needed it more than his office did. She had written back to say the rate negotiation was fair and the archive donation was accepted, and she was well. She was well. She examined this periodically, the way she examined a map she had made, checking for accuracy. The examination returned the same result each time. She was well. She was where she wanted to be, doing work she understood, in a place that had become known ground in the way ground became known only through time and attention. She opened the Calverton records. They were administrative documents from a 60-year span, covering the territorial consolidation period, during which the 5-pack territory had undergone significant boundary changes under 2 successive Alpha Kings before Calem's father. Dry language, precise dates, formal records of decisions made in rooms she would never be able to name. She read for 2 hours. By the end of the second hour, she had found the pattern and confirmed it. It was not a systematic exclusion of all settlements. It was more specific than that. It was a deliberate policy, documented in 3 internal council memos from the 40-year-ago consolidation, of removing from official PAC records any settlement that fell outside the newly drawn boundaries during the territorial adjustment. Not destroyed settlements, not abandoned ones. Settlements that continued to exist, with people in them, living in the ordinary way, but that became administratively invisible because they sat on the wrong side of a line that had moved. 43 settlements, 43 names that had been on maps before the consolidation and were not on maps after it. She put her pen down. She thought about 43. She had been expecting something like this. She had been building toward this finding for 2 months. She had known, from the pattern in the exclusions, that the number would be significant. 43 was higher than she had estimated. She thought about Ajmer, and about 42 other places like it. She picked up her pen and began writing the survey reinstatement document. This was a formal process, one she had researched carefully before the Calverton records arrived. It required a specific format, a supporting evidence brief, and a signature from a recognized authority in PAC land law. She had already spoken with Gareth Cole about the authority signature 2 weeks ago, quietly, without telling him exactly what she had found, because she had not wanted to make the case before she had all the evidence. She wrote for 3 hours. When she had the document in a form that was complete and accurate and organized in the best possible order, she took it downstairs and knocked on Calum's office door. She came in and put the document on his desk and sat in the chair across from him and told him what she had found. She told him about the 43 settlements. She told him about the 3 council memos. She told him about the policy and the period and the administrative language used to justify it, which was careful and bureaucratic and read, 60 years later, like exactly the kind of language used to make something difficult look like a routine administrative matter. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question, which was whether she had confidence in the evidentiary basis. She said yes, and told him why, and named the sources. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 43. Yes. He looked at the document on his desk. He looked at the page count. He looked at her. What does reinstatement require? He said. Formal survey of each location to confirm current occupancy status and establish the correct boundary reference. Updated records in the official PAC survey archive, signed by a recognized authority. Public notification to the affected settlements that their status has been corrected. She paused, and a formal acknowledgement in the council record that the exclusion occurred. Not an apology in the ceremonial sense, just a record that says clearly what happened. He looked at the document. Timeline? For the survey work, 6 months, if we have 2 field teams. Possibly 8 with 1. She had already thought about this. I can supervise the archive reinstatement concurrently with the survey process, so the record corrections do not have to wait for the full field completion. I can begin as soon as you sign. He picked up the document. He read it. He was thorough in his reading, which she had come to expect. The same careful attention he brought to everything she put in front of him. He signed it. He handed it back. She took it and stood up. I will start with the 7 settlements closest to the Central Territory, she said. They are likely to have the most complex boundary implications given the number of overlapping cases I already have open. He nodded. Send me the field team request by end of week. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow then. She was at the door when he said, the next gathering is in 8 months. She turned. He was looking at her. Not with the deciding look, or the reading look, with the look she still did not have a name for, the one she had first seen on the day he came back from the border and found his maps corrected, and which she had been seeing with increasing regularity since. I know, she said. It will be different than the last one. Yes, she said, it will. She went back to the archive room. The 8 months before the next gathering were the busiest 8 months of her professional life. She supervised 2 field teams in the settlement survey work, managed the archive reinstatement process concurrently, continued the correspondence chains, brought Owen Fitch to the point where he could handle 2/3 of the routine field report processing independently, resolved the Western exclusion case documentation, and produced a 43 settlement reinstatement map that she considered, without false modesty, some of her best work. She also learned to navigate the residence compound in the dark without thinking about it, which meant she had stopped mapping it consciously and started knowing it the way she knew things that had become part of her, which was differently than knowing something new. She learned the sound of the building at different hours. She learned which fire basins burned late and which were banked early. She learned the particular light of the archive room at every time of day, and how it changed in the summer, and how it would change again in the winter. She learned what it meant when Calum was in a council meeting that was going badly, which was a quality of stillness in him that she could distinguish from his ordinary stillness, and which she had begun, carefully and without announcement, to address by having a particular problem ready to work on when he came to the archive room in the evening, something that required the specific kind of focused attention that cleared the head by occupying it completely. He noticed. He did not say so. He showed up for those evenings with the particular readiness of someone who understands they are being offered something useful. She noticed that he noticed. She did not say so either. She sent Aldous the survey notes from the remaining Eastern cases he had originally sent her to collect. She included a note saying the cases were fully resolved, and that if he had further disputed boundary work in the region, he was welcome to commission it through the Pack Council Survey Office, which she was now, in effect, running. Aldous wrote back to say that was the most efficiently escalated assignment he had ever given anyone, and that he was going to tell that story for the rest of his life. In the week before the gathering, the 5 packs began arriving. The tiered grounds filled again. The compound swelled with the organized activity of thousands of people reassembling in the place they came to every 5 years. She watched it from the east-facing window in the archive room. She thought about the first time she had seen it, from the hillside above, coming down through the strange-smelling forest, with her bag slipping off her shoulder, looking at the valley and thinking, a gathering. There would be people. She would find Crispin Dale. She had found considerably more than Crispin Dale. She left the window and went back to her desk. The day of the gathering ceremony, she was up early. Petra helped her dress, because the ceremony had requirements, and she had spent 8 months learning what they were, and was prepared to meet them. The dress Petra had brought was deep green, the kind of green that had weight to it, a color that did not try to be something else. She looked at herself in the glass for a moment. Same brown hair, same ink stain on the right hand that she could not seem to permanently remove despite her best efforts. Different room around her, different clothes, same person. She had checked the survey work on the morning. 4 of the 43 settlement reinstatements were now complete and formally recorded. The other 39 were in process. The eastern boundary cases were resolved. The correspondence chains were current. Owen Fitch was reliable. She was ready. She went downstairs. Calum was in the main corridor. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them needed to say anything about the fact that today was different from the day she had first stood in this building's corridor and waited for him to come back from the border. They walked to the gathering grounds together. The grounds were full. The tiered rows were packed, the standing areas dense. 2,000 wolves, the same number as last year, and the same silence fell when the Alpha King entered. She was with him this time, not a figure discovered by accident on the dais, but a person who had walked in through the main entrance, with the deliberate intention of being exactly where she was. She went up the 3 steps to the dais. She sat down in the throne. Not by accident this time. Not because she was tired, and it looked like the most comfortable option, and she had not noticed who it belonged to. She sat down in it with the particular intention of a person who has worked out, over 8 months of steady, careful attention, exactly where they belong, and exactly how they know it. The crowd was very still. She set her survey notes on her knee, because she had brought them, because the Grayford Fork case had produced a secondary finding that she wanted to review during the formal elder presentations, which were long. She was not going to sit in a throne for 3 hours without something useful to do. Calum looked at her. He was standing at the foot of the dais steps. She looked back at him. The expression on his face was the one she still did not have a single word for, but she had given up trying to find one, because she had understood, sometime in the past 8 months, that not everything needed to be named. Some things could simply be known the way you knew verified ground, not because someone had told you, but because you had walked it, and checked it, and trusted the data. She looked out at the gathering grounds. She looked at the tiered rows, and the standing areas, and the 2,000 faces, and the pale stone of the circle. She thought about the last time she had sat here. Half a bread roll, a map she had been trying to find notes in, boots damp at the toes, a man coming through the gate with a look on his face that she had not known how to read. She thought about now. She thought about 43 villages, and an archive in 4 crates reorganized in a better order, and field reports coming in from verified correspondence, and a council record that said clearly what had happened, and that it was being corrected. She thought about a route through 11 miles of dark territory and a cold stone under her palm, and the sound of 12 witnesses going quiet, in a way that had weight. She thought about a lamplit room and cold tea, and a man in a reading chair who had told her there was a door she did not know about, and then watched her choose not to use it. She thought about the look on his face right now, at the foot of the 3 steps, and thought that she had a better word for it than she had had 8 months ago, even if it was still not a complete word, even if the full understanding of it was still something she was working toward, the way you work toward the far edge of a territory, steadily, from verified points, checking as you went. She turned back to her notes. The throne was still not comfortable, in the way that mattered. The stone was still old and hard, and the cushion did not solve the problem of the armrests, which were too wide. It was, however, exactly where she was supposed to be. The gathering began. She was in it this time, not by accident, and not by someone else's decision, and not because the bond had put her here, though the bond was real, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She was here because she had walked 11 miles of dark territory, and checked the information, and trusted it, and kept going. She was here because she had looked at complicated ground, and mapped it, and put the names back on the things that had been taken off. She was here because she had decided to be. She opened her notes. She found the secondary finding from the Grayford Fork case. She held it in the light. The gathering went on around her, formal and ancient and very much alive. 2,000 wolves, doing what they had done here, for longer than anyone now living could remember. She worked. She was good at the work. She intended to keep being good at it for a very long time.